Hello, this is Greg Grimsby. I teach game design at George Mason University, 3D modeling, animation, and a little bit of game 101. And I thought I would share my process for how I create cards for a card game. I've been working on a card game called Ogre's Dinner for about 3 years now. Cards, dice, fighting ogres, all that fun stuff. And the process that I have used to wrestle with all the variety of cards, and here is just a sampling of the cards that are in the game. How do you wrestle with that combination of graphics and text and iconography? Well, the way that I've handled that is I use, of course, Photoshop, but I also use Excel, and I use data sets to be able to use Excel to talk and export out to Photoshop. And what that allows me to do is I can have a data-driven process where I can take this ugly spreadsheet and I can keep all of the card text here, all the fields, all the different numbers associated with each card. So assuming you know how to use Photoshop, at least enough to function, and Excel enough to function, then this video can walk you through how to set up a similar workflow for yourself. And just to call out again, what this allows me to do is I can name cards, and whenever I want to make a change to lots of cards, maybe I decide I need a new field or new type of card, I can go in here and start to construct that data set. And I even have some columns here I don't even use anymore. I just haven't gotten rid of them. But here I can change cards. I can make notes to myself. This is like a note column. And then this is the sheet that I actually will export out. You export out a CSV, and I've made a little simple macro script here that allows me to make this edit. And it looks something like this. Just a simple little sheet exporter, and you don't have to use this, but it saves me time because I can just press this one button and it's going to do what a file save as CSV would do for me. This kicks out a CSV file, and then I go over to Photoshop, and here in Photoshop I'm going to hide my master gang up sheet here, and we'll talk about that more later. This card is the master card that drives all the other cards. It's my template, so to speak. It's where I have the background frame. It's where I have all the layers set up and structured. I have hooks, in essence, named layer hooks that when I set up the linkage, the CSV will be able to change that data indirectly through the help of Photoshop's data sets. So for example, I've got the artwork layer, which is in through here. I'm going to click on the actual master sheet. Here's the artwork layer, and it's empty right now, but what will come in is it'll bring in the graphic that I've pointed to in my spreadsheet. I have the title of the card here. It's named name, and that corresponds to the same exact header, case sensitive here. So the name of the field is name, and these are all the different bits of data that I've set up for that. So whenever I update the data, this field will get overwritten. Let's show you this in action to get a better sense of how this is working. I'm going to go to edit, image, variables, data sets. And here is the interface for this. A data set is one entry, one set of entries. Think of it as one card. I've got lots of data sets here, lots of different cards. So that's kind of a misnomer, or not the best name. You might think of a data set as being like all the data. Well, no, it's just one card. It's one row in your spreadsheet. So this is a data set, that's a data set, and etc., etc. So my data set 1 is the artwork pointing to a PSD file pointing to a layer named artwork. So that's how we see that relationship. I have a text entry field, the gameplay short, which points to this text and this layer. Let's preview how these look as I cycle through. Nope, I think I'm in this field somehow. It just decided it wanted to kind of barf on me. Let's try that again. All right, so preview on. There we go. Just being a little slow and laggy here. But I can use this to show you how that data set is going to update. So this artwork comes in. This is the text there. This is the title. And any other elements that I have turned off or on is going to demonstrate, it's going to reflect how I've set up the sheets. So there is the torch, which is, again, artwork, specific text. And I'm turning on the weapon label. I'm making it visible so that it shows. The net result is once I've set up the spreadsheet and I have my template and I've created all of the associations between these headers, header names, and the names of my layers, I can then export this all out by going to File, Export, Save Datasets as Files. This will bring up this dialog where I can then create a naming convention. This convention is not great right here because it's just a document name, but this is what it's going to call this right now, but I might call this something more specific, like these are just the ogre cards. I can tell it to add this underscore. I can tell it to add nothing here or add the number. So I'll have ogre card 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the data set number is. And then once I select a folder, this is going to export out each of these as a PSD, a separate PSD that I can then edit. I'm going to export out just a single one of these so you can see what this might look like. So let me go to File, Export, Datasets as Files. And I'll just do Dataset 1 and select a folder. And let me plop this into my working directory. I'm going to call this temp, not to get confused with my real stuff. And number this after the data set. So that's all ready to go. I'll hit OK. And it thinks, and it's going to bring in all the external dependencies like the images, and it's going to set up the graphic and export that out. So that's done, and I'm now going to open that up and take a look at it. So here I should have a temp file. So there's the temp file. Now this has all those elements that I had defined, and I can go in and I can hand edit any other elements that I want to. Now maybe you don't need to do this. I've done some font editing to put these graphics inside of my font, and perhaps that's perfect for you. You're good to go. But my master PSD file has these extra icons that I can use to cover up these text-based icons with graphical ones. And this is a fair bit of work, but I don't have to do this every time. And that's an important point about this workflow is you don't have to go through this exporting of all the cards every time if all you're going to do is change one typo. If I just have one typo on one card, I can just load up the PSD for that card, and I can fix that typo or add a rule change. And then I can go back and make sure the spreadsheet reflects that same thing. I can choose about how I want to work with any one particular file versus the whole data set. So this is now ready. I can save this out as a final card. And let's go back to that. Two more things I'll point out here. I do have the main sheet. Now what this is I have a template from the print and play company that I use to print my cards, my prototype cards. And they sent me a template with these cards in these locations with bleed and all that stuff. So there's the bleed and the cut lines. So I know where to gang all these up. Each of these cards is a placed card that's been complete. So I go to File, Place Linked, and I could place that card that I just hacked together. And it's going to come in at 300 DPI, matching the DPI of this page because I made it at 300 DPI. And I just have to snap this into the correct location. Looks pretty good. And now that's there in that sheet. So this goes off to the printer, and I'll have a copy of that card. Any changes that you make to these don't update necessarily. I can choose when I want to incorporate those changes. The little hazard sign here on these icons indicates that Photoshop knows that the asset changed, and I can right click and go update all modified content. And then any cards that have changed since the sheet was put together, it's going to load up the new version. And now this reflects all of the changes on the individual cards. So I don't mess with this sheet until I'm ready to print, and I know what cards I want to print. It also allows me to do color correction. I have some hue and saturation and some curve adjustments that I do on all of the cards here in this master sheet. Instead of having to do them on individual sheets, I can correct those here. And I will close that out. Last thing I want to point out is how I use in my templates a lot of smart objects or placed objects, which are similar. So in here, I have, let's find a good example. Well, the actual frame of this itself. This frame is a placed object. It's a link to another Photoshop file. So if I need to make changes to just this frame, I can go make those changes, and then it'll update again into this PSD. So even within my template, I have the ability to work on these as separate files and bring them together into this one aggregate Photoshop file, this master file, which then drives the cards themselves. So any art element in here that I feel I want to repeat in all the cards or edit maybe and have it in the manual or have it in different places, it has a purpose or a life outside of just this file. It's saved as a link. So this here, you can see the link icon. I can theoretically open this up and it will launch the original asset. So there's that asset. And I can edit this asset, and then once I save it, it'll update here in this document. And then when I load up other versions of this, it will have that modified hazard symbol, and I can choose to incorporate that change or not. So it's possible I will record a part 2 of this that will show you how to set up your own data set more specifically, but this is an overview of how this process works for me and how it might be useful for you. I do want to acknowledge that you can do similar things in InDesign with their data merge functionality. For my project and these cards, which are very graphically driven, I've just stayed in Photoshop where I am comfortable. So again, I might do a part 2 of this, but thank you for watching. Let's take a look at how we can set up the data sets in between Excel and Photoshop. So I have a card template here that's at 300 DPI with bleed and cut lines marked, and you'll want to have a similar file when you start your card game. Let's just make some fields that are common fields that you'll want to set up to talk to Excel. First, probably a name field. So with the text tool, I'll click and drag and make a field for that and call this name. You'll want to have all this made pretty at some point. It might be useful also to test and see how many characters that you can get and count these. The W is pretty much usually the widest character that you can have. And apply that. So there's my field, and I'm going to rename this by double clicking and call this name. Over in Excel, I've started a new workbook, and this field is going to be name, case sensitive, and I can start naming my cards. So this is card 1, or how about the weapon of doom, which might not fit, but I can test and see what's going to fit in here and what's not going to fit. And the shovel. Card 1's kind of boring, right? Axe of death. So positive. So those are the names that I'm going to have for my cards. Let's go back over. And let's just get that working before we get into doing too many fields. So we're minimizing the number of variables that we have going on here. I'm going to save my PSD. Not that it's required, but it's good form to make sure that I'm not going to lose anything. So this is my card prototype. It's also your master card, meaning that it's the card that's going to drive all of your other cards. That's been saved. So now let's go ahead and define our data set. So go to variable, define. And these are the names of the layers. And there you can see we have the name layer right there. So select that. If you want Excel to replace the text, you have to check this, and it's going to be text replacement, and give it the same name that the Excel column is named after. And I like to have the layer name and the column name match up, and hit enter to apply that. So that relationship is very obvious. This is the same name of the field as it is here in Photoshop. All right, so let's go back, and if you have other ones that you want to set up, you could do that. Go back to define, you'll see now that this has an asterisk, and it is set to be a text replacement. Cool. Let's go to the data sets now, and we're going to load up the data set, which is actually your spreadsheet. Let's import this. Well, first I do have to export it. So we can hang tight. We can leave that there. Let's go back and Alt-Tab over here. And we're going to export this sheet out. And change the file type to a CSV, comma, delimited CSV. And I'll call this card data. And you can see it is a comma delimited field. Hit save. And you want to make sure that you save your workbook as an Excel also. This will allow you to keep formatting, formulas, all that stuff that won't survive being saved as a CSV, unfortunately. Back over to Photoshop we go. Let's select that same file. Text over to CSV. Click on the card data CSV and hit OK. And you can see that it has found the data sets. There are just the 3 data sets, the 3 rows in our spreadsheet, row 1, 2, and 3, and this is the header. And you can click through with the arrows, and if we turn on preview, you'll see these apply. And I can see that the weapon of Doom doesn't fit, so I have to either shorten the name of the card or adjust my font to get more characters in on that line. So just using preview here is allowing me to see what the card's going to look like. All right, but I don't want to hit, well, I can hit apply, but I'm just going to hit OK, and I've set that up. I can hit Control S to save my changes. I made some changes. I set the data set up, so I got to save that. Now, to actually kick out your card variations, you're going to go to File, Export, Datasets as Files. Pick a location. I'll set this to my documents again. Name of the card, whatever this will be for your game, whether you want underscoring and numbering, and hit OK. And it's going to export out those PSDs, one PSD for each of the data sets, which should now be here in my documents. I should have, well, I must not have had that set right, just to screw up the video. Let's go back again and take a look. Datasets as files. Oh, yeah, I had set for just the one data set. Go to all data sets and hit OK. And yeah, let's replace that. And that's going to overwrite all three of those PSD files. Now, those PSD files are going to have all of the layers of the original master. They just have had those fields edited. And that's what allows you to have in your master if you have like an icon. So let's say this is an icon that we have. Which is a fancy red fill in this case. And let's say we want that icon to only exist on certain cards. Let's make this a little more like a better example. Let's say it's like a sword icon. And that sword represents a certain power or ability that the player is going to know. So I'm going to name this sword. And we can set that up as to whether that's going to be visible on any particular card. Close out these. Let's go back over to Excel. And I'm going to say sword, true, false, true. Save my Excel. And I'll export out another CSV. And that should be the same location. Notice that this is just back to being a CSV, and you're going to get a complaint from Photoshop about the file being open. So this is why I have a script set up that I use to save out the CSV separately. So we'll go back to saving this as an XL. So we don't get that conflict. Back over here, we've made a new piece of data that we had to set up. So we'll go back and we'll head to the data sets. Let's define it first. And here in our layers, we have sword, and this is going to be visibility. Basically true or false. And we call this sword, named after that other column. So wherever we have true, false, it's going to affect visibility yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Save my template. And now we're going to go and re-import that. Well, actually, we don't need to re-import. Let's take a look. Previewing those. Yeah, let's re-import this. Hit OK. And now that we've re-imported it, you can see that the visibility has been set up, and that layer is blinking off and on depending upon whether it's true or false. And I could re-export out, and then I'll have my 3 new cards, this time with that relationship set up. So I hope this has been useful for you. You also can use this to point to images. If you type in inside of Excel, you can put a path to an image here, the full path, C colon, blah, 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 and put the name of a PSD. And if you want to do a complete art inset here, you can do that as well. And with that, that's it for using data sets and Excel and Photoshop. Thanks for watching.